through my content, I always try to infuse as much like personality through it, like sharing more of my social sides to not make it as transactional as perhaps like buying groceries in the supermarket, but like, hey, people buy some of my products because they feel a connection with my story or there is something specific that stood out to there. So I think that's where, like, for me, the social aspect in selling definitely comes into play.
Welcome to the Making Sales Social podcast, featuring the top voices in sales, marketing, and business. Join Bryn Tillman and me, Bob Woods, as we each bring you the best tips and strategies our guests are teaching their clients, so you can leverage them for your own virtual and social selling. Enjoy the show. My guest for this episode of Making Sales Social is Jessie von Breugel, a digital creator and lead generation specialist who started his creative entrepreneurial career at a time that ended up being a little rough for the world in early 2020. But a little thing like a pandemic didn't stop Jessie, though. Since then, he's grown a following of more than 40,000 people across various platforms, including LinkedIn, X, formerly known as Twitter, and I don't know if I will ever be used to calling it as X, as well as YouTube and email. And to prove his bona fides, he was recently named as a top 50 LinkedIn creator worldwide in sales and marketing. Jessie's that flavor of person that I like, a content geek / copywriter / coach. He sees himself mainly as a digital creator who builds cool products, and who wouldn't like that, as well as helping as many like-minded experts generate high-quality leads through LinkedIn and productizing their service offers. So, Jessie, welcome to Making Sales Social from the Social Sales Link Studios.
Well, thanks so much for the invitation and the nice welcoming words. I'm excited to have a chat with you today, Bob.
Oh, that sounds great. Appreciate hearing that. So, our first traditional question in every Making Sales Social episode is, what does making sales social mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would like to, let's say, split my answer in two parts.
Sure.
Because with my business, I both sell, I would say, services and products.
Okay.
And I would say one of the rules that I would say I took this over from my business mentor in terms of services is that he only gets clients that he would like to have a beer with. And I kind of copy that rule in terms of like, okay, I want to work with people that I actually enjoy spending time with, because then I know that we can have a great collaboration. So I think that's where the social aspect for me comes in play, and not necessarily only focus on, oh, I need to get the paycheck from this client, but it's like, is there a personal fit in terms of like doing business? And I think on like the product side of things, I think through my content, I always try to infuse as much like personality through it, like sharing more of my social sides to not make it as transactional as perhaps like buying groceries in the supermarket, but like, hey, people buy some of my products because they feel a connection with my story or there is something specific that stood out to there. So I think that's where, like, for me, the social aspect in selling definitely comes into play.
That's really cool, because most people, when they answer that question, go along the lines of, oh, it's about connecting socially, blah blah and things like that. I haven't really heard anyone go in the direction you did, but I think that the direction you went in is actually very important, and something that I think that all of us should keep in mind, no matter what we're doing when it comes to sales in general. So I really like that. Really like that answer. That was great. So we've already gotten into just a little bit of the how, actually more like the when behind your journey, a little bit of your origin story for superheroes, and they say like that, if you will. Let's talk a little bit more about the why, though. What inspired you to delve into this niche of digital creation and lead generation?
Yeah, so it started as like I would say an escape. Like in the beginning, you said that I started my entrepreneurial journey in the midst of 2020. Before that, I was working corporate in like a customer success department. So it's always like in between like departments, building or getting solutions ready. But besides that, I always had a passion for writing. So my entrepreneurial journey started by writing online. And through that, I carved out brands first on Twitter, now known as X, and then on LinkedIn. And I say through the process of writing, I've always been able to learn more myself, but also help others in the process, get reach, and like build products along the way, all like based on writing. And I often joke about this, like most people, they first go into business and then they go start creating content. Where for me, it was like I first started creating content and then I rolled into business. So everything that I learned from about business is based on the writing aspect.
Wow, yeah, that's really, really interesting because you're right, a lot of people focus on the business idea and then try to back content into it. So, um, yeah, no, that's a really great point. I like that a lot. Is that a mistake that you see a lot of people do in terms of not is content is almost like an afterthought if they're even thinking about it at all?
Yeah, I would argue that content is one of the highest high leverage tasks you can do in a business. But of course, it's like it's playing the long game. It's like for
Mhm.
every business, like content can be your ultimate salesman or saleswoman. Like I see my content um, as like an army of digital warriors. Like they pave the way, they go the world, they travel the world doing my work. Like they're my sales puppets. So I think every business can of course thrive by that. But then the question is more like tactical because not every business has their audience on LinkedIn. Certain platforms might be better for certain industries, et cetera, et cetera. But that's of course a much more tactical question. But I do think that nearly every like industry or type of business can uh like benefits from having content as a big part of their marketing strategy.
Yeah, so that actually leads to an interesting question that just popped into my mind because when it comes to the social channels, it seems to me that especially when it comes to B2B that LinkedIn, I think for a vast majority of businesses is where it's at. And that's obviously what we do. So I'm probably a little biased on that. But there are those other platforms out there, and I've always kind of looked down at the former Twitter because I think it's kind of a cesspool, to be honest with you. But I do see people on there trying to get business from there. Do you still think that, you know, I actually do think that Instagram is probably good, especially if you have a visual type of business. But do you think that Twitter, now X, is still gonna be good going forward? And what do you think about Threads too, if you've even been on Threads and we haven't even mentioned that yet?
Yeah, so to answer your first question first, I actually started monetization on Twitter. So like for the first year and a half, I sold my products and my cohorts through Twitter. Uh, but I really had I would say a harder time to get that off the ground. And that brought me back to LinkedIn early 2022, and the rest is history. I would say to just like use like a cliche quote there, uh, because I would say by selling on both platforms, like the biggest difference in favor of LinkedIn I've seen is that by LinkedIn there's like so much more trust baked in the platform because people interact with people. There's much more like, hey, I'm interacting with Bob Woods. Like, okay, I think I'm almost sure this is the right person because there are almost no fake or impersonated accounts. As on Twitter, everyone can be Elon Musk, everyone can be the Zug. So there is a lot like impersonation possible. And I think Twitter is a much more of like a consuming platform. People go there to waste time or to just learn stuff, where LinkedIn is still the number one business platform in the world. So that's where I found the biggest difference in terms of like it's easier to sell through that because people there are more business oriented. But again, it comes down to which industry you are. So for example, uh like e-commerce is, I think, better for Twitter because that's for most of the audiences. Like I don't see many e-commerce brands nail it on LinkedIn because the demographics are not there. Vice versa for like gadgets or like beauty products. You won't see them on Twitter, you won't see them on LinkedIn, but you will see them on TikTok and Instagram because that's much more about like the whole visual stuff around it. So again, it kind of
Right.
ties into what are you selling for who and then which platform is the best for it. But to summarize there, like I've sold similar products on Twitter and I've sold similar products on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is much easier, I would say, because again, people trust you more because they're like, hey, I didn't do actually talking with Jesse and not talking with a profile.
Yeah, yeah. I cannot argue with any of that. I think that that's a great way to put it. So let's kind of roll this into digital content a little bit more. In your experience, how has the role of digital content evolved in the B2B sales process? And if you can think of, and I'm sure you can, any ways of, individual salespeople, whether they're working for companies or they are their own company, just leveraging digital content to enhance their sales efforts.
Yeah, I think it's still something that's very doesn't get like enough attention within businesses because it's of course it's a long-term strategy, and there needs to be a lot of buy-in from the team. So what I've seen so far from like the more employed world is that sure there are some people that try it on their own, but it's often not really like it's more done from themselves than from the company itself. And now you see the trend picking up that companies start to see the importance of it. So then more of the department are like shifted into that. Um, and I think LinkedIn is still one of the biggest platforms for that. But then you see like kind of like a spray and pray method, what you often see. So it's like people are good for it or like enthusiastic for like 2 3 months, then don't see the results and stop doing it. And especially with like the
Right.
brand the branding and like the content game, it's of course the consistency that pays off the most.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, you see so many companies out there expecting this huge initial bang, and sometimes it does happen. I mean, we can't deny that, but more often than not, it is a long game, and it's just like building credibility. Generally speaking, credibility building doesn't happen immediately, and I think that there's a lot of correlation between, just the overall process behind building credibility and then using digital content to build that credibility, because you're still building credibility in the end, and that doesn't happen in 2 to 3 months.
No, exactly. And even if it would happen in that 3 months, it's often like a short-lived effect.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. I think that's an important point, and I do think that that really speaks to, for people who do have this luxury, and it is a luxury because, a lot of times, sales and marketing kind of butt up against each other, and they really should be working together, but, sales and marketing collaboration is important. So how do you see the relationship between sales and marketing teams evolving, especially when it comes to lead generation? And do you have any thoughts about ensuring a seamless collaboration between these two departments that, like I said before, seem to be at loggerheads at times, and they really shouldn't be at loggerheads?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I've definitely like seen this clash when I was still in my like corporate job. But now as like a solopreneur, I'm both the sales guy and the marketeer of my own
Yes.
company. So I'm
Yep.
wearing two hats at the same time. And it's like a benefit because I'm at every sales call and I know every piece of content that goes out. So I think the biggest win like these companies or like I would say teams can make is like communication is first because as a marketeer, you want to know how the sales call goes. And as a sales call, no, you want to know which kind of marketing goes out because I see marketing as like the biggest one because the better we can do at marketing, the easier the sales becomes because better marketing attracts better prospects who are more informed, are more ready to buy, which makes the closing a piece of cake. That's why I focus most of my efforts on like crafting extremely good content for my ideal clients because then I know that the people that it attracts are a good fit. And that's of course like an always like iterative process. But I think a quick win for like teams could be just starting with okay, what are the most common, I would say, deal breakers from a sales perspective, and then we put on the marketing hat and like okay, how can we create or manufacture assets that we proactively put in the hands of prospects to make sure that these deal breakers are not an issue anymore. And that's how I always like think about these things because when I was back in customer success, I was always thinking, okay, we got a problem right now. Like, how can we build something or put something in place that this problem doesn't exist anymore? And that's how I also like built my solopreneurship. But I think that's the same mindset that sales and marketing teams will, I would say, have to overcome. Like put the ego aside, like, okay, why are we not closing these deals? Okay, and how can we put, in this case, marketing assets in place to make the sell easier and most likely worth more money.
You did hit on something that I think that really rolls into my next question really well, and that has to do with metrics and analytics, because this is something that most salespeople probably don't think about, because the only things that they're worried about is like, opening ratios and close ratios and things like that. Now you have all of these marketing types of assets that you have out there, and you really should be tracking which ones are doing well, which ones aren't doing well. Which metrics do you believe are the most crucial for B2B salespeople to monitor, and why?
Yeah, that's a broad question, but I can, like, I would say I can give like a multifaceted answer to that. Uh, like the first part of the answer would be, don't overcomplicate it. There are many tools out there now for especially LinkedIn that are make tracking super easy. I'm a big fan of Shield. I used to use that myself, and Shield is like super easy, and it's like it's either for individual teams or individual persons over teams. But that aside, I would say it's good to, and this taps into a little bit of like content strategy, but I really believe, and that's also what I teach to my clients, that every piece of content has like can have a different like goal. Like with certain piece of content, it's audience growth, it's engagement, it's lead generation, it's all these things. So based on the goal, we can decide, okay, which metrics of the post are important, because I know that a very heavy lead generating post, I don't rate the success of that on the number of likes, comments, or impressions. Whereas if I put out a more educational piece, which I intend to put out to grow my audience, I rate the success of that on, okay, how much impressions did I get? How much new followers did I get? How much new comments, etc.? How many shares did I have? I make that the benchmark. So I think for people that are starting in the journey, it's just a um, simple question is like, okay, why am I posting in this case on LinkedIn? Is it to grow an audience or is it to generate leads? One, of course, they go hand in hand, but based on that, it becomes easier to say, okay, this post success or this is not a success, and we can set some benchmarks on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one of the things that we teach when it comes to, content on LinkedIn, and I just want to kind of toss this by you really quick, is that metrics are important, and obviously we do look at metrics, but we think that the interactions that come as a result of the posts are just as important, even if not important, because you can use those interactions. If you start a conversation with someone in comments, you could then, potentially get a sales conversation or just a regular conversation started based on those comments. And so, we view metrics as important, but the most important metric I think that we have is just how many conversations we can get based off of that content, which isn't really, it's not really content driven as much as conversation driven, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect summary there. Um, it's all about having the conversation starters.
Absolutely. And we think that especially that educational content really works, because when you're teaching, at least it's been my experience, when you're teaching someone something, and they go, "Oh, I didn't know that. That's really interesting." It almost seems like that their minds start to open up to really start to want to learn more about that subject, and because their minds are opening up more, they are more willing to accept new ideas and to even talk about them potentially too.
Yeah, definitely, and that ties into something that we discussed earlier. That's where I see content is so valuable, because not everyone that sees our content the first time is ready to buy. Like certain people are more aware of the problem they're having, or they just need more uh, information about the solution we have. So one of my, I would say, favorite soft selling tactic is like a process breakdown, which I like to call it, where I just have a post that explains more about how I work.
Looking to up your LinkedIn game? The Social Sales Link team has you covered with our LinkedIn Sales Accelerator, a guided social selling program that includes training, coaching, and so much more. Visit socialsaleslink.com/in for more details. Again, that's socialsaleslink.com/in.
With my clients, or how working with me looks like, etc., etc. Because as I'm a service provider, certain people are just like, okay, I have no clue what he actually does, and then we need to educate our audience, especially in the high ticket space, educate them up till the moment they're like, hey, now I'm ready to buy. So that might be, for certain prospect, that's 3 days. For certain prospect, that might be 6 months. And again, we want to nurture them to our content. So that's of course where engaging and initiating this conversation becomes so important.
Great. Yeah, no, I could not agree with that more. So I think that that dovetails really well into my next question, which is, y- uh, as we're, especially as we're starting out and doing these types of things, we're going to be making mistakes. So, what are some of the common mistakes that you see people on LinkedIn do when they're doing all this content stuff, and what are some of the biggest challenges that they have in even getting stuff out in the first place?
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to like the mental blockages. Uh, like so the easiest way to cure that is by just getting started. Like just get started with like 1 or 2 posts a week. Ramp it up the more you feel comfortable, because the longer people like procrastinate on starting to write, the bigger of a like a demon it becomes. So I think that's one of the biggest things, and that's really hard because I don't think there are like any programs or services that help people like overcome like mental blockages. So that people have to do themselves, but just getting started, accepting that the first 10 posts will suck and you won't go viral and all these things. Uh, and I think that's a big one. Let's assume that people are already get started. I think then the common mistake I see people making is stopping before it starts working, or expect to have like unrealistic expectation, like what ties into the first question, like after 3-4 weeks, it's not working. Well, that's based on, I would say, wrong expectations, because the goal in the beginning is to keep writing. I think the goal in the beginning is not to gain 1,000 followers overnight, or to generate most of your high ticket leads or clients in the first 3-4 weeks. If it would happen, perfect. But I would say it's good to temper those expectations. Another mistake I would say that I see people making is go from a little bit like broader than LinkedIn on itself, but I see them hopping from platform to platform. Like say
Ah,
they first start on LinkedIn and they have a few posts there. Then like, oh, I need to be, that's the belief they have. I need to be on Instagram too. Oh, I see other people killing it on Twitter. Now with threads coming out. Oh, it's only that. So and then the thing they say to themselves, like, hey, yeah, but I already wrote this post for LinkedIn. I can easily repurpose it there. But especially in the beginning phase, like most of the learning process is also about the dynamics of a platform. Like even if I would start on, let's say I'm gonna do lead generation on Instagram, even though I have 3.5 years of content creation, I still have a learning curve because I don't understand fully how the platform is used for that case. So I think that's what people like often underestimate. Like, yeah, I got the piece of content, but there's a whole different game to learn in order to get the same results. Plus, my counter argument to that is always like, hey, did you already complete LinkedIn? Are you the number one in everything, or whatever the platform is? So there's always there's always more room to grow there, especially early stages.
that sounds that's great advice. That's great advice. One thing that we hadn't talked about before, in our conversation prior to hitting the record button, but I just want to get your take on it, is video. So I mean, everybody is like, "Oh my god, I got to put up content." Then they start seeing people who are talking to other people through video, and they're like, "Oh my god, do I really have to do video?" Do you think that people really have to do video?
Uh, I don't think people should do anything, but like it's always like a personal choice. But especially like let's say, okay, again, two parts of the answer here.
Mhm,
Earlier on in the content journey, you want to stick with a format that you feel the most comfortable with. For me, that was writing. For other people, that might be podcasting or video. So then learn your learn the way of content through that medium, and then branch out later down the road.
mm,
Like I started with writing. I added video, I think actively like 3 4 months ago, but I was already like already created a few courses. I was familiar with like doing live sessions in terms of the codes that I run,
mhm,
because for me, as I sell high ticket services, I know that video is an extra layer of personal branding, because people hear how I speak, how I teach, how I look, all the kind of things. So that will either like move them closer to working with me or move them further away, which is fine because I'm not trying to be perfect for everyone. Plus, what I've seen on LinkedIn specifically, or sorry, on YouTube specifically, there is a gap for the knowledge that I mostly write about. Like most of the LinkedIn content on YouTube is more like the sales navigator, cold outreach kind of stuff, where I'm teaching my clients inbound inbound lead generation through content. So there's a big gap there. So that's why I'm like tapping into that opportunity. And I think for me it's an interesting game to learn. But again, I've I have to understand the dynamics of YouTube in order to grow there. And this ties into the question of my answer to the previous question.
yeah.
So I think video is definitely here to stay. Uh, Last bit on that, I also see that there are more evergreen assets. So I always like to see as my every piece of content that I create, I see as an asset. But like the lifespan of it on LinkedIn is like 1 2 3 days, perhaps a week if it goes viral. On YouTube, it just evergreen. Like my best performing video on YouTube was my first video, no editing, no rerun, no nothing. It's my
Mhm,
best performing video. It's there up for like 4 months, and it's every day it gets seen. I didn't do anything with hashtags and stuff, but I just spoke up apparently about a good topic in a good way. So that's for me like an interesting insight as well. It doesn't have to be as polished as people think. Sure, there is this whole section of like all the brushed up YouTube stuff, but I go more for like lower production, highest value.
yeah, that's really interesting because that gets into the whole, topic of content consuming platforms, and we've touched on this a little bit. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok is especially content consuming, and you think that LinkedIn has a little bit more of an edge to it, and I'm wondering if you can get into that just a little bit.
In terms of content consumption, you mean, Bob?
Yeah, mhm, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting uh question to think about, because what I've observed is that the intention of people that go to LinkedIn is different. They go to network, to learn, to be exposed perhaps to new ideas. Whereas the other platforms that you mentioned, people just go more to like waste time or just to doomlessly scroll. So I think that tied in what I said earlier in terms of like it's perhaps harder to do business on the consumption platforms. But if you do it
Mhm.
right, there are more eyeballs because there are overall more people there. Um, and yeah, it also really comes down to who are you serving, because you can still be like we spoke about earlier. It's like e-commerce doesn't really thrive on LinkedIn because there's no audience for that. Uh, so again, it's kind of like there are many answers possible to this question.
Yes, so for me, think I think that part of it has to do with when people are on LinkedIn, you touched on this already. They do have more of a purpose to be there. They're not necessarily there to doom scroll or whatever, although I'm sure that some people do that on LinkedIn as well. But when it comes to LinkedIn, because there's an expectation there that it's more professional, that people are a little more willing to start professional conversations there in comments and in direct messaging and things like that, as opposed to Instagram or X or whatever, where God knows what happens there. But um but I also think that because with LinkedIn, it's easier to find content from the same creator by going to the profile and just looking at other things that they've shared, as well as just having the profile there, which the LinkedIn profile is just massive in terms of what you can do in terms of educating people and proving to people that you're a thought leader and everything, as opposed to Twitter and Instagram, where you've got that one little block up top and that's it. You can't really do anything with it. I think that that's a little bit more of where the edge comes in a little bit. So I don't know if you would agree with that, but it does seem to me that maybe that's where the edge of LinkedIn comes a little bit more, as opposed to the more content. I guess it's almost a case of content consuming versus content slash interacting, I think might be a good way to put that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question, and I didn't think directly to like the LinkedIn profile, because I do see the LinkedIn profile as our own landing page, because as you perfectly laid out, you can add like the featured section, you can add the hyperlink, you can add like, you can almost like style it
Yep.
as like a one pager. And especially
Yep.
for us in the service space, it becomes the perfect way to sell myself, my business, my services, etc. Whereas on you, um, Instagram or Twitter, you almost have to be creative with like a link tree, but people are really wary of like clicking that, because then there's like they're like too much. And
Yep.
LinkedIn is much more of like a natural flow of things. So that's a good thing. And I would argue though that LinkedIn is very much a consumer platform as well, because
Okay.
I joke about this sometimes, because it doesn't matter like which role in a company someone has, and it's always allowed to have LinkedIn open on their computer as like a tab, even though they're not even like HR or sales or whatever. People are
Oh yeah.
allowed to scroll LinkedIn. So that brings me to the saying that with 900 million, that's of course not the same, but like 900 million people are on LinkedIn, like not so many like active users. Less than 1% post weekly or a few times a week. So there are so many eyeballs are on the platform because everyone is scrolling, and only like like a select few of the people are actively creating content. So I would definitely say that it's a consumption platform, but the quality of the eyeballs might be higher than on other platforms.
That's a very interesting point. A point that I've never really thought about like that, but I like it. I like that a lot, definitely. So let's talk just let's just touch a real little bit about content creation. And I'm specifically thinking about Chat GPT here and other generative AI types of services out there that can help, because it's definitely a huge interest of mine right now, and we're starting to incorporate that into what we teach here at Social Sales Link. It's a very favorite subject of mine. I'm just wondering how, not only how you use it in general, but do you have advice for people who are using generative AI to help them with content? Because it can be a huge help, especially for salespeople who are looking to get time back into their day to not do content as much and to, go out there and do sales.
Yeah, for me, it's I saw myself late to the game, because I think I only started using it like in April-ish. But I would say in
Mhm.
the biggest scheme of things, that's still like early adopter.
Yeah.
Uh, but for me, it has been a massive unlock, because my output has like massively increased. But besides that, also my thinking has become sharper, because how I treat ChatGPT in this case, I see it as like the most eager and ambitious intern I've got. Is willing to do
Mhm.
anything for me, but I have to be extremely concise and clear and
Yeah.
specific what I need and what I don't need. So an example, like before this call, I was mapping out some of my like processes and stuff, and at some point I was stuck in my thinking. So I have ChatGPT open. I even use like a browser extension so I can talk to it, just spit out my talks, and then it talks back to me. So it's just like an ideation partner.
Yep.
So I just outsource my thinking, but it also forces me to ask better questions, because it knows everything. So ask better
Yep.
questions, get better answers. So it also forces me to just get better thinking, which I can then use in the rest of my life outside of my laptop. So for me, that's been a game changer. Like simple examples, I've built like prompts for content creation and content strategy creation, which I teach to my clients. And I think like 2 weeks ago, I even taught my girlfriend how to use it. And in the beginning, she was like, "Oh, it only gets like poems and stuff." And now she's using it on like such a way of things like, "Oh, I got this challenge. Let me write it in there." So it's fun to see how it's like a mindset shift in terms of like, "Oh, it doesn't do what I want." No, how can I ask a better question to get the results I need or the outcome
That's
I want?
exactly right. Yeah, I love that thing, and you're right. It's amazing how when you start using it a lot, it really shapes how you communicate with people outside the platform too, because you can really think of ways to get exactly what you and it's usually information and things like that out of people only because you're asking questions in the right way and you're being very specific about it. So yeah, I mean, it's it's all good, and I definitely like Chat GPT a lot when it comes to content creation and things like that. So, we all love those one thing you can do right now takeaways when it comes to conversations like this. So, what is one thing we can all do today to bring in better clients with better offers and better content through content? What's something someone can go out and do basically right now?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm gonna give a very unsexy answer, I think, and that's write the first post. I know that's like a big task, but my humble advice would be get off the zero streak. So it's better to just have something going and just get started. Don't worry about like strategy or positioning or personal branding and all these like big amorphous things. I think if people are on the edge or on the fence of like, okay, yeah, I think the content game is something that I want to like get into,
Mhm.
is start writing. And then some of the advice is more tactical, is one of the questions that I kept repeating to myself in the beginning when I was like stuck on an ID process, or sorry, an ID to write about, is like one of the simplest question: what is the advice I wish I heard 6 months ago? Because especially like
Mm.
B2B salespeople, they are in constant like good confrontation with their prospect, with their clients. They're constantly
Yeah.
like having good conversation, closing deals, missing deals, losing this, etc. And I'm
Yep.
pretty sure they have lessons, insights, challenges, whatever, reflections that 6 months ago they wish they had that because back then it was a problem. So I think that's whatever industry you are, whichever role they're in. If you're a business professional, like writing for your past self, I think is always like a great exercise.
That's amazing. That's amazing advice. I like that a lot. And I think if there's and I'll kind of throw something in that's like really adjacent, but I think works really well too, is if for some reason you're still just like, I'm not positive that I want to like even write that first piece of content. And this is LinkedIn specific, by the way. Um, Start going through your timeline, start finding content that other people are putting out, and maybe make a comment or two on their content. And I'm not talking about doing the typical great post, oh, I love this post type of thing. In other words, add your thoughts to it, add your reasoning to it. I don't know if I necessarily disagree unless you think that someone is just so off base on their post. Then at that point, yeah, might want to. I would generally apply a yes and type of philosophy to it. But even if you start getting comfortable with commenting, that can kind of get the ball rolling a little bit there for you. Plus, if you're commenting on someone's content and you're thinking, oh, that might actually be a good post, that might be the springboard to that first post that Jesse was talking about. So, commenting and obviously commenting is something that we teach and it's very viable in terms of starting sales conversations, but even just getting you more used to the LinkedIn platform, commenting is another great way to get started too. So with
Yes,
that, yeah,
that's a very good point. Like I've had so many posts that originated from a comment,
yeah,
especially because my feed now is of course curated with like peers and business professional and prospects and clients. So it's like I don't have like farmers on my link on my feed.
Ah,
So everything that I interact with is semi or fully aligned with my stuff. So then you have indeed a comment, and all you need is like the spark. Oh, this is a great idea. And then you write the comment, put it in Notion or put it in document, whatever you use, and then expand on the post. So that's a really
right.
good way of like getting over the fear of like public exposure, because commenting us already like, hey, put yourself in the spotlight, and then you can use that to create a post out of it.
Right. So, obviously, if you want to follow Jesse on LinkedIn or any of his other channels, go ahead and do that. But if people want to learn more about you, your offerings, where can they go, Jesse?
Yeah, that is a good question. So people can go to premiumleadsystem.com/podcast dash opt-in. I think, Bob, you can do the link in the show notes as well,
Yeah.
because
Yep.
this will get people like a quick 3-step strategy, like an ebook, like a guide to get started on LinkedIn. So the 3 topics that we cover is profile optimization, creating content and generate leads, and there was a little part about like strategic engagement in terms of networking. So covers everything that we spoke about today. So that's like my gift to the audience if they want to get started that way.
Yeah, that sounds good. So again, that's premiumleadsystem.com/podcast dash opt-in.
Oh, exactly.
So great. No, that sounds good. So Jesse Van Breugel, content geek, copywriter, coach, and digital creator extraordinaire. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time today, sir.
Yes, thanks for having me, Bob.
Absolutely. And thank you for streaming this episode of Making Sales Social. So remember, when you're out and about this week, be sure to make your sales social. Thanks for watching, and join us again for more special guest instructors bringing you marketing, sales training, and social selling strategies that will set you apart. Hit the subscribe button below to get the latest episodes from the Making Sales Social podcast. Give this video a thumbs up and comment down below on what you want to hear from us next. You can also listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play. Visit our website, socialsaleslink.com, for more information.